Thank you, Young Em. Thank you, Mignon, and thank you, Mary, for that very warm and beautiful entry into our service to be together as a fellowship, seeking strength in one another's presence. I am very mindful that as we gather this morning, there is much happening in our society that gives us pause. Over 500,000 people have been evacuated from their homes in California, Washington, and Oregon. Many of those, when they return to their homes, will find their homes in ashes. Injustice towards marginalized persons in our society continues to spread like a fire as well through our society, as do social and political divisions, and of course COVID-19, and all the ramifications of these movements and trends. We feel perhaps overwhelmed as we gather. May we consider the words of Wendell Berry, who sought to bring solace to those who were wondering what to do next. He wrote, "It may be that when we no longer know what to do, we have come to our real work, and that when we no longer know which way to go, we have come to our real journey." We gather here to compose ourselves, to find the center within ourselves and among ourselves, to be in community with others, and discover ways to be resilient in the face of the myriad things happening in our world. Hoping that by doing so, we can be a force for healing and nourishment in this world. Resilience is connected to the ancient word equanimity. And Kate Johnson, a meditation teacher based in Philadelphia, said some words about equanimity I will share with you now. Equanimity is the heart of love that is able to hold the truth of suffering, the truth of change, and the unfathomable workings of karma, and able to work with the fact that we are not able to control all circumstances all the time. It's the heart that's able to hold all of these things in love anyway. Equanimity is not the same as indifference and certainly not apathy. It's just love that gives a lot of space to life. That space that makes it a sustainable kind of love, and one that's very useful for the challenging times in which we live. As we gather, I would like to light our chalice to reflect our coming together as one in the light of truth. And I share with you, as our chalice reading, words of Alice Akachima Nasman, who wrote, "In a time of uncertainty, when everything around us is changing constantly, each day, new developments, rising numbers, changing guidelines, when the world we live in suddenly seems upside down and topsy-turvy, we light our chalice to remind ourselves of our grounding in our faith. We remember that the flaming chalice came into being as a beacon of hope during World War II, that it is a secret symbol that offered help and hope. In the midst of it all, we wrap ourselves in the warm light of a familiar flame, a reminder of the strength that emerges when we come together in community. Thank you, Pam. That was an incredibly powerful story, and it illustrates perfectly what I mean by resilience. I'm on my way. If they say no, I am still on my way. Thank you very much for that story, Pam. And Mignon, thank you for the choice of that hymn that was so appropriate for our subject today. All of us, without exception, will experience major changes in our lives. All of us, without exception, will be called upon or have the opportunity to bring comfort to those who are going through major life changes. So the subject of resilience is something that is relevant to each of us at certain points of our lives, but also it is relevant for our community. Because as Pam just said a moment ago, what if he had had more help along the way? What could have been possible? So communities can be either resilient or not resilient. So it behooves all of us as a community, as individuals, as members of a family, and in every dimension of our lives to understand resilience. I will be talking about resilience over the next 3 sermons. It's a big subject, and I'll try to put in to those sermons things that I think are relevant. There are events of life that are so powerful, for whatever reason, that they alter the course of our lives. And they threaten our endurance and sometimes our survival, emotionally, psychologically, if not literally. Resilience is the word in the English language for what is required to face these life-altering events. Any event of our life that is disruptive and provokes anxiety, emptiness, and disorientation is an event that calls upon us to be resilient. The most powerful, life-altering, and anxiety-provoking events are, first, the loss of a loved one. Second, a serious life-threatening illness that visits us or close loved ones. And third, any event or events which changes our career or job or social or economic standing in a significant way. The core feature of a traumatic, life-altering event is it disrupts our sense of who we are, what we are in the world, what our relationships are, what is the meaning and purpose of our lives, and what is our role. And the types of events that can affect us in that way are innumerable. Any change, if it threatens to disrupt life as we have known it, provokes anxiety, a sense of potential emptiness, and disorientation. And research has shown that even positive events can be stressful and anxiety-provoking. A marriage, a promotion, the inheritance of money, the birth of a child, things that we normally associate with the greatest things that could happen to us are actually, on a physiological level, things that are upsetting to us and create stress. So the core concept is change. The sources of significant change can be, I think, best viewed as the forces of three overlapping concentric circles. The inner circle, the inmost circle, the circle which touches our lives the most, deals with our personal life and deals with perennial, inescapable issues such as transition in life from employment to retirement, or the birth of a child, or a significant change in life, and of course, most powerfully, the death or the loss or the chronic illness of a loved one. Outside of this circle, this inner circle, there are the ordinary stresses of life, the challenges of our relationships, struggles with a boss, the difficulty with a child, the chronic illness of a loved one, one's own chronic illness, difficult circumstances of any kind. And what is potent about these forces is that they're chronic. So I'm referring not to episodic problems and difficulties, but chronic problems of any kind which seriously touch us, whether it's personal or social or vocational. They are another source of stress. There's a third circle that surrounds all of us and touches us periodically, and sometimes more than periodically. And this third circle consists of the accumulated effect of all social, political, and economic and religious influences impinging upon us. These forces never leave the outer edges of our life, and occasionally they intrude into the inner core of our lives, as is the case right now with COVID-19. Here I am talking to an empty audience except the sainted Greg filming me, and we are in changed circumstances, and COVID-19 did this and has done so many other things to us. So thus, the outer ring has penetrated into the inner ring. Now let me dwell a moment on this third outer ring, because it is significant to understanding the total picture of the stresses impinging upon us. In 1970, a writer named Alvin Toffler wrote a book called Future Shock. And in this book, he said that we are entering a time, this was in 1970, we're entering a time when the rate of change is increasing rapidly. Change has always been with us, but the rate of change is now increasing. And here we are. Ecological change, a swelling human population, rapid technological development, wildly uneven distributions of wealth, an internet that connects everybody and allows all kinds of good and bad information to run back and forth at the blink of an eye. All of this is enormous change and creates in totality a cacophony of disruption that fills the landscape of our daily lives. We live in a time where this outer circle of social, economic, political issues penetrates into our inner lives. These background sources of stress are much, much more keenly felt by the marginalized groups of society. More so, much more so than by the privileged members of society. But in certain ways, they touch us all. Future shock, which we are now living in, encounters human beings that evolved over hundreds of thousands of years without knowing the unending rapidity of change which every human being in developed countries knows today. Human beings evolved, in other words, in a life that was a much slower pace regarding significant change. If we can understand the three circles of stress and how they work in tandem and perhaps sometimes alternately to affect our lives, we can begin to understand what we're up against. There are several things I have learned about resilience over the years, a subject I've been very interested in for a long time and have done quite a bit of reading about. And I'd like to share with you some things that I will go over in more detail in my other sermons. First of all, resilience is important. Whether or not a person can find resilience in themselves and in their environment can make a huge difference in the life of a human being, in a family, in a congregation, in any group. Number two, although there are always unique characteristics to resilience in each person who is resilient, there are nonetheless universal characteristics that research studies have shown again and again to define resilience. Resilience then can be described, it can be understood, and if understood, we can grow in resilience. Third, we are innately resilient. Human beings would not have survived the long journey of evolution they have if we were not resilient. And the interesting thing is human beings, by their thought processes, by their emotions, by the way they think habitually, and the way they choose to relate to one another, can get out of harmony with the innate resilience that is a part of our heritage as human beings. Fourth, social support systems are essential to what we call resilience. Fourth, racism, white supremacy, and all the numerous ways one group of human beings try to establish domination over another human being places great difficulties in that oppressed group to be resilient. Finally, I would like to very briefly share with you what I see as the core 8 characteristics of resilience that I will talk about much more in the next 2 sermons. These characteristics of resilience are not pulled out of my head, but rather they're grounded in research. And there's a great deal of research about resilience. Let me share those with you now, very briefly. The first characteristic of resilience is the ability to face facts. It is imperative to be resilient, to be as realistic as possible in assessing one situation. Second of all, it is essential, and there are some exceptions to this, but they're extraordinary. It is very, very important to find people who one can talk to about one's difficulties and challenges. Another way of saying that is it's very important to find good, non-judgmental listeners. Third, it is very important to articulate, to get clarity about, to articulate, and then to face one's greatest fears. What we find again and again is that people who are going through great stresses have one or two core greatest fears that act like an empowerment of all their other fears. And it's so important to face that core fear and to seek to resolve it in some way. The fourth characteristic is the ability to envision a positive future. The fifth is the ability to move towards what is nourishing and healing. The person who's going through a difficult time must find a way to answer the question for themselves, what nourishes me? What strengthens me? It might be found in places one is unfamiliar with, or the answer to that question might be surprising, or it might take one to unfamiliar places in one's life, but one has to relentlessly ask that question. What nurtures me? What nurtures me? 6, the ability to cultivate personal agency. Another way of saying this is working toward bringing the locus of control from outside oneself to inside oneself. This is very important because the person who has been struck by devastating events is often left feeling helpless and powerless. It is so important to find ways to reestablish agency, even if that is only going for a walk daily and taking time to call a friend. 7, to be aware of and to avoid negative patterns. There's all kind of rabbit holes that people go down. Blaming themselves, blaming other people, asking what if, asking why, being overcome by shame, being reluctant to open up to other people. There are infinite numbers of patterns that are negative. One needs to be aware of them and to avoid them. And finally, it is important to practice compassion toward yourself, not by another person, but you having compassion over yourself and your life, something that seems quite awkward and unfamiliar to many people. It is also important to practice the art of forgiveness and the art of letting go. There are things that we must sometimes let go of, and it is important to our survival to do so. I believe that human beings have the capacity, rarely understood, rarely appreciated, that is far greater than they realize, to deal effectively, constructively, and creatively with loss and tragedy. And some of the most remarkable people I have known and I have read about are people who have been touched by loss and tragedy, and rather than being lost in that and consumed by that, are able to convert it into something positive, such as a much deeper compassion towards other people and a much deeper appreciation for the frailty of life, which is part of all of our context. For those able and willing, knowing and understanding resilience, which can be defined and is not an unknown quantity, can help an individual be more resilient, and even, perhaps more importantly, help communities to understand how to be helpful in helping others to be more resilient. And by helping ourselves and helping others, to navigate the seas of loss and change and the threat of loss and change. We can be of service to humanity, to one another, to ourselves, and life. Last week I spoke about the core drama of life being to be a self in relationship to other selves, but also in relationship to all of life. And what is profoundly challenging about stress and loss and tragedy is that it shatters our inner and outer sense of harmony, even to the point of despairing that we will ever be able to recover that. But that belief is not true. There is hope, there is strength, there is resilience. Together, let us learn it as we go down our path. I would like to express my deepest appreciation to all those persons who participated in today's service, and also all of those people who made the service possible, working behind the scenes. All of them have given a great gift today to all of us, and I bow in gratitude to you. Now, as we extinguish our chalice, may the light of this extinguished flame go out into each human heart and be transformed into the warmth of love, the illumination of truth, and the light enabling us to find our path ahead. I would like to share with you as our benediction and closing words something written by a colleague, Reverend Joel Miller. He wrote, "Let our lives be a prayer that waters dry souls, mends broken hearts, refuses to be terrorized, seeks this world's beauty, and carries us through its storms." Amen.